Alrighty, everybody. Hope your assignment two went well. Make sure that you have turned those in because we're going to start some new material. All right. So we've talked about, animating or creating motion graphics with images. We've talked about things like working with vectors and masks and track mats within After Effects. Now we're going to kind of move into sort of the post-production, which is to say, kind of trying to make things a little bit more, or working with the concept of 3D or three dimensions within After Effects. Okay. Now, I will tell you, straight from the back, After Effects is not a 3D program, not in the sense of something maybe like Blender or Maya or like 3D Studio Max to that degree. Um, in that things do not have a width, a height, and a depth. Okay. So for instance, what we're not doing is something like this. This is Blender. By the way, I do teach the Blender class or the 3D graphics class that usually takes place in fall. So if you are interested in more learning like 3D graphics, like kind of like this, like 3D modeling or doing 3D animation, that would be more, that would be the Digital 14 course, quick plug there. But instead, After Effects is what we kind of call a 2.5D course. So 2D is, two dimensions. This is like your traditional kind of flat animation. Think of it as like Bugs Bunny or Homer Simpson or Peter Griffin or something like that. Um, in 3D, traditionally there is depth. So for instance, here it's like there is width, there is height, and then there is depth. Um, the way that After Effects works is that it does have items in 3D space, but they don't have depth. So the best way to kind of explain it would be, and don't worry about what I'm doing because we're not doing this particular thing in this course, but I just kind of wanted to show it. This is a flat plane, okay? See how there's no depth to this plane, right? But this plane can exist in 3D space. It can be forward or backwards. It can go left or right. So it does exist in a, 3D world, but it's still a two-dimensional plane with no depth. Okay. That is kind of what we're going to be doing here in After Effects. That's why we call it a 2.5D. I put a couple examples in the module of kind of like 2.5D to kind of give you an idea of like the kind of things we might kind of do in this course that isn't necessarily related to um, full 3D. Now, you have to understand that, traditionally most graphic design programs are two-dimensional. Okay, so things like Photoshop, Photopea, Adobe Illustrator, Figma, even After Effects defaultly is a two-dimensional program in the sense that all of your content only has two dimensions. It has a width, aka X, direction, and it has a height, aka Y, or the Y axis. Okay. In three-dimensional programs, items have Z space. Okay. Z space is, or Z depth is how close or far from the canvas you are. Okay. So here I am. This is exercise one. And I just have a couple, I have some items here. And normally, if I were to select like the cat or the dog or the little cute little wiener dog here, and I were to choose, if I was to move it, I can move it right, left, up, or down, right? In reality, what I'm really doing here is I'm moving it in two-dimensional space. I'm moving it vertically, which is the y-axis, and I'm moving it left and right, which is really the x-axis. What we're trying to do is we want to move it towards or away from us, like this. All right. And that is the z-axis. Okay. That is kind of what I was discussing here, where if you were to look at this plane straight on, I can still move the plane towards or away from you, even though you're still seeing it from like a flush perspective. That's kind of what's going to happen here. Now, to make any layer in After Effects three-dimensional, you want to go to your toggles and toggle switches and modes, which are here, and you want to click on this thing that kind of looks like a three-dimensional cube. So if I click on, I'm going to do it with the dog, and I click on that, oops, and actually, we'll talk about what happened here, but it actually, we're looking at this from a different perspective. We're looking at this from the top perspective. Sorry, I'm getting my bearings here because it looks like they did some things here. Draft in 3D. Sorry, I'm just trying to. All right. If you get something like this, actually, what I'm going to do is open up this composition window to be wider. I'm doing this by pulling this to the left, and you should get something that looks like this, where it says top. I'm going to go back to where it says active camera default. We're going to talk about what that is a little later. But for now, I just want to be able to see my composition with the the 3D being applied. And if I were to look at my position by hitting P, you'll notice that normally I would have two values, right? There would be the X value and the Y value. But now I'm getting three values. I'm getting the X value, the Y value, and the Z value. And the Z value is how close or far this particular item is from the camera, aka the audience. So if I were to increase the X value. Now it looks like what's happening is the dog is getting smaller, like a scale, but really what's actually happening is essentially this is where it was starting, and then it's moving away like that. And when things move farther away from the camera in backwards in three-dimensional space, it looks like it's getting smaller, but it's really just that it's further away, right? If I use a negative value, like so, once again, it kind of looks like I'm scaling the dog up, but that's actually not what's happening. Instead, once again, it's just bringing it closer to the camera. So if I bring this vertically, it looks like this, it looks like it appears like the square increased in size, but it hasn't changed its size. All it did is get closer to us. And so that's kind of what's happening here. Where I can now, if you want to be able to move your character in space, we have tools for that. So we have what's called, um, I were to grab this, I can move my character in three-dimensional space. I am grabbing the dolly, which is allowing me to move it basically. Actually, so if I put my cursor right there, you see how I'm actually affecting the Z value? It's a little hard to see because it's like literally pointing at us, but you can see how when I click and drag that, it's changing my Z value. Okay. So for now, it might be easier just to use the literal numbers, but I could click on the cat. I'm going to turn on that will give this the ability to be moved in 3D space. I'm going to move it backwards in space. Or I could click on the Z value and drag it towards or away from the camera. Same thing here. Let's click on the wiener dog. And I can move it in X space, Y space, or if I click on this little, it's a little hard to see, but basically it's an arrow that's coming towards us. That's why it kind of looks a little bit off, and I can do something like that. Okay. At any point, if you don't like what's happening, in terms of being 3D, you can simply turn that on, and then it goes back to being a two-dimensional object, which means it can only move in the X and the Y direction. All right, so we can move objects in three-dimensional space. We can also rotate objects in three-dimensional space. So, once again, you have to understand that your object is essentially a flat image, okay? It's not a three-dimensional object that has actual depth. So, if I had a complex object, I can rotate it and I can see it from all different perspectives, right? But your object is essentially, your image is really like a flat plane like this. So when you rotate it, you're really just kind of, it's almost, it's like kind of tilting like a playing card. It's like it doesn't really have any, you're not going to really see any depth here. You're just kind of rotating it like that. And unlike that cube I showed you, when you flip around a two-dimensional object, it's the same on the other side. So what's going to happen here is I'm going to click and I can hit the R for rotation. Now, normally you can only rotate it in towards the camera, but now I can actually rotate it in different directions. I can rotate it in the X direction. The X direction means it comes towards or away from you. Okay, so if this is like my image, I can rotate towards you or I can rotate away from you. That's what's going on here. I'll set it back to 0. If I do Y, it's basically rotating it like this. I call this the carousel. This is how a carousel would rotate, right? And then Z is kind of like our traditional rotation, where it's rotating towards the camera. Like with my ability to grab this and pull the direction, I can also, you can see here, I can click and rotate in the Z direction. If I click on the X, I can rotate in the X direction. Or rotate in the Y direction. Okay. Seems to affect more of the orientation, but the orientation in this, at least at this moment, is about the same. Okay. All right, so now that we understand some of the basics, we can also keyframe this. So in other words, I can keyframe my character moving in three-dimensional space. So for instance, if this, you know, I'm gonna set my time marker to 0, set my position wherever I want it to be. Let's keyframe that. So my X value is about 1050. I'm gonna go about 2 seconds in, and let's do like I'm gonna use a negative so it goes towards the camera as such. All right. So in this case, I'm changing the position to come towards or away from the camera rather than just going left, right, up, or down. And I'm going to take this car and let's set the Y rotation. The Y rotation does this. Remember, it's kind of like a carousel. And why don't we rotate this one full rotation? Keep in mind, like I said, when you rotate something in three-dimensional space, it's going to repeat what, or it's going to mirror whatever it does on the opposite side. Objects do not have three-dimensional space like they do in maybe a three-dimensional program. We'll talk more about that later. Let's talk about scaling three dimensions. So here I have this dog, and the dog is set up in three dimensions. I can move it in X value in terms of its X, its Y. All right, sorry, that was its X. And then that's its Y. Where's its X? Or its X. If you scale it, so I'm gonna undo this. I could scale, right now I'm scaling in the X direction. I'm scaling in the Y direction. Those work the way they normally would. Unfortunately, you can't really scale in the Z because, like I said, you got to think of it as a three-dimensional plane, like a playing card. Playing cards have no depth, right? Or so it's like you can't really like in the same way if I took this, I can't extend this out. See how I'm like there's no like three-dimensional depth here. That's the same issue that's happening here. So just be aware that yes, you can animate, we can take advantage of, say, three-dimensional placement, position, or three-dimensional rotation. If the object is a simple two-dimensional object like a picture or a video, you're not going to have three-dimensional depth with it. Okay, just be aware of that. All right, I think this was just another example. Just playing around in three-dimensional space. Yeah. So, I can animate my character here in three-dimensional space. Maybe it's going back into the distance. Whereas I'm going to rotate this car in three-dimensional space. All right. I want to, so take a look at that. Try this out. That was exercise 1, 2, 3, and 4. You can go through the instructions as stated, give you guys kind of, uh, examples there and just work with the um, three-dimensional layers. Okay.